Deep beneath the earth lies a haunting darkness. The air is thick and impenetrable as ink. 13 people vanish suddenly without a trace. No one knows whether they are alive or dead. The cave's entrance closes tightly behind them, turning what was once an adventurous destination into a colossal tomb. Outside the cave, rain pours down mercilessly as if tearing apart the sky. Inside, every passing minute pushes their heartbeats closer to death. When elite special forces become powerless, when even international experts fail, people begin to expect the worst outcome, but at the very moment hope seems to have nearly vanished completely. An insane plan is devised. An unprecedented rescue mission in human history commences, with anesthetics, with lives hanging by a thread, and with souls suspended precariously between life and death. This is a story that held the entire world breathless, and you will not be able to tear your eyes away from a single second of this miraculous tragedy. In 2018, Thailand experienced a mysterious event that prompted responses from 17 countries, including China, Japan, and the United States. 12 young soccer players from Chiang City, along with their coach, had set out to explore Tham Luang Nang Non Cave. This is the fourth largest cave in Thailand. However, once they entered, they completely vanished without a trace. Initially, their families were not overly concerned because the cave had hosted numerous adventures before. Moreover, there was an adult accompanying the children, so nobody anticipated any danger. It was not until heavy rain fell continuously through the night without the children's return that the families recognized the gravity of the situation. Immediately, they drove to Tham Luang Cave. Seeing 13 bicycles scattered carelessly at the cave's entrance, the parents became certain that their children were still inside. But no matter how loudly they called out, there was no response. Outside, the rainfall intensified, causing increasing anxiety among those waiting. Because each time it rained heavily, Tham Luang Cave experienced flooding. If the children were trapped inside, there was practically no hope of survival. At 1 o'clock in the morning, a Navy SEAL Special Forces unit received emergency orders and swiftly arrived at the scene to initiate rescue preparations. The deputy commander quickly arrived as well. To devise the best possible rescue plan, the Special Forces carefully reviewed the cave's structural maps. They discovered that the internal structure was extremely complex, and the terrain was narrow, yet fortunately there were still several large chambers capable of providing survival opportunities for those trapped inside. Soon after, the Special Forces prepared their gear and commenced their initial exploratory mission. However, after 4 exhausting hours, every team member, despite having state-of-the-art equipment, returned covered in injuries. One member nearly lost his life. Conditions inside the cave were far more treacherous than anticipated. During this first mission, they managed to advance only 800 meters into a cave system measuring 10 kilometers in length. Observing these highly trained professionals returning in such desperate conditions, the morale of the victims' families plunged to rock bottom. Hope gradually faded away in everyone's hearts. The next morning, news of the incident quickly spread and soon escalated into an international event. Local authorities urgently appealed for global assistance. Countless volunteers from around the world immediately arrived to help. At this time, a water engineer happened to pass by. He noticed volunteers using pumps to drain water from the cave. Even though they were using the largest available pumps, his experience told him this approach would be extremely ineffective. Indeed, under the guidance of an elderly local man, they climbed to the mountain's summit and discovered floodwaters were aggressively pouring into the cave through numerous sinkholes. The only solution to fully resolve this was to divert the mountain's floodwaters down to the plains below. However, this created a dilemma. If they carried out this plan, the fields below would be devastated by flooding. An entire year's worth of hard labor by local farmers would be swept away instantly. Faced with this difficult choice, the deputy commander personally approached the farmers to explain the situation. He hoped they would willingly sacrifice their interests in exchange for a chance to save innocent lives. Unexpectedly, after only a brief discussion, the farmers immediately agreed. They were willing to accept the losses to save the children's lives. As time passed into the 5th day, rescue personnel from various locations grew to 1,000 people. Among them were 2 experts from the British Cave Rescue Council. Immediately upon arrival, they donned diving gear and rushed directly to the cave. Their appearance completely altered the rescue situation. First, they reached chamber number 3, approximately 800 meters from the entrance. People there were rapidly pumping water, yet the water level continued to rise relentlessly. Clearly, the rescue operation could not afford further delay. The 2 experts quickly proceeded deeper into the cave. After a few dozen meters, they put on masks and dived into the murky waters. However, visibility inside the cave was extremely limited due to muddy water. Jagged rocks protruded on all sides. Without caution, these sharp edges could easily cause severe infections. Additionally, the passage was extremely narrow. Becoming stuck between rocks could be fatal. Despite the dangers, both experts continued cautiously following a safety guideline rope. Even a single meter consumed tremendous energy. After 4 exhausting hours, they reached a trapezoid-shaped intersection about 1.6 kilometers from the entrance. This was the first area that could provide shelter from rising floodwaters. They guessed the children might be hiding there. However, after a thorough search, they found no sign of anyone. With no other choice, they continued deeper into the next chamber. Just as they departed, the mountainside unexpectedly collapsed due to flooding. The water level rapidly rose at an alarming rate. Thanks to extensive experience, they managed to narrowly avert disaster. Yet they knew clearly the route ahead was even more perilous. Unable to risk moving forward, they reluctantly turned back along the original path. Unexpectedly, upon returning to the forward communication chamber, they found a worker who had been repairing emergency pumps trapped on a rocky ledge due to a delayed evacuation. Since they had no spare diving equipment, John voluntarily gave up his mask and oxygen tank so Rick could safely escort the worker out first. Initially, this seemed like the optimal solution, but soon after entering the water, the worker became overwhelmed by claustrophobia. Panicking, he struggled fiercely, trying to break free from Rick and rise to the surface. During the struggle, Rick's oxygen mask was accidentally knocked loose. Fortunately, Rick reacted swiftly, enabling both to safely return. Rick then immediately went back to rescue John. They quickly reported the underwater dangers to the deputy commander. To prevent further casualties, the deputy commander temporarily suspended all rescue activities. 2 days later, the heavy rain still had not ceased. Inside the cave, no news emerged. Families organized prayer meetings but were slowly losing all hope. Now they merely wished the government could at least recover their children's bodies. The rescue team immediately convened an emergency meeting to discuss the next steps. Some believed they should wait until the rain stopped and then drain the cave before making further decisions. But Rick and John strongly opposed this idea because every passing minute brought the children closer to death. As cave rescue experts, they believed they were capable of completing this mission. They proactively requested permission to re-enter the cave. However, the commander decided to delay further discussion, because if foreign volunteers lost their lives within the country's territory, nobody could bear the responsibility. But just at that moment, an inexplicable event occurred the following day. According to legend, 300 years ago in the Thai royal palace lived a beautiful princess who fell in love with a stable boy. Due to their social status differences, the king strongly opposed their relationship. To avoid separation, the lovers escaped to Chiang and settled in a cave. This cave was Tham Luang itself. When the king discovered this, he dispatched 13 assassins to pursue them. During one hunt, the stable boy was found outside searching for food and was killed. Hearing of her lover's death, the princess stabbed herself with her hairpin. This story was merely a tragic legend, but strangely numerous Thai citizens simultaneously dreamed the same dream. In this dream, the deceased princess revealed that the 13 people trapped inside were reincarnations of the 13 assassins. She had trapped them to take revenge. However, if someone could locate the reincarnation of the stable boy, a revered monk named Kubaha Vanchuan, she would mercifully release them. Though the story seemed fantastical, people desperate for hope immediately searched online. Astonishingly, they found a monk named Kubaha Vanchuan. He swiftly traveled to Thailand because during a missionary trip in Myanmar, he had experienced the same dream. Upon arriving in Chiang Rai, he held a ceremony, then entered the cave alone. No one knew what happened inside, but after emerging, he declared the 13 trapped people were still alive. As soon as he departed, the rescue could resume. Miraculously, the next day, Chiang Rai's weather suddenly cleared. Rescue efforts resumed immediately. Rick and John received orders to proceed again. This time it took them 4 hours to return to the trapezoid intersection where previously they had to stop. Now they not only continued beyond this point, but successfully reached the cave's largest possible shelter area called Pattaya Beach. Yet unfortunately no one was there. Still refusing to give up, they kept diving for another 2 hours, finally arriving at a chamber called the Rescue Chamber, approximately 2.5 kilometers from the entrance. At first they thought their efforts were in vain, but as they shined their flashlights into the darkness, several faint figures appeared. It was the missing soccer team and their coach who had been lost for 10 days. Miraculously, all 13 individuals were still alive. Though all 13 were alive, the prolonged lack of food had left them severely emaciated. Rick was astonished yet overjoyed as he could hardly believe they had persisted for so long. It turned out that during their days trapped underground, the coach had continually guided the children in meditation. This helped soothe their fears and conserve energy. When hunger became unbearable, they searched for underground streams to drink clean water instead of the muddy rainwater. That was how they managed to hold on until now. Listening carefully, John emotionally took out his camera to record this moving moment. But when he intended to ask more about their condition, Rick interrupted him. Time was running short. They needed to immediately return to the entrance to formulate a detailed rescue plan. Finding and confirming the survival of the 13 should have been the greatest possible news. But as they returned, Rick and John were burdened by heavy hearts. They even reminded staff members not to publicly reveal that the children had been found. However, the staff were too overwhelmed by emotion to heed their warnings. News immediately leaked out. The rescue site erupted in celebration. Yet, amid this jubilance, Rick and John felt increasingly uneasy, because they knew rescuing the children from the cave was hundreds of times more challenging than simply finding them. In fact, it was nearly impossible. Initially, the deputy commander underestimated the severity of the situation. He confidently promised to mobilize the most elite Navy SEAL team along with state-of-the-art equipment for the rescue. But Rick explained clearly that this was not a problem of divers or equipment. Instead, the main difficulty was that the rescued individuals without any prior training could hardly survive a 7-hour deep dive through flooded passageways. Previously, a worker fixing a pump had nearly died after diving only a few hundred meters due to panic. Now, expecting young boys with no diving experience to endure over 2.5 kilometers underwater was essentially impossible. Hearing this, everyone fell silent. This was precisely why Rick and John had initially opposed publicizing their discovery, because knowing the children were alive yet unable to rescue them was far more agonizing than never having hope at all. Yet at this moment, the urgent issue was not immediately extracting the children, but delivering essential supplies to sustain them. Under Rick and John's guidance, 3 Navy SEALs spent 7.5 hours delivering necessities to the trapped victims. They believed food and clothing would help the children hold out longer. But after measuring the oxygen level inside the cave, it had dropped below 20%. If extraction did not happen soon, the children would undoubtedly suffocate. Even worse, when the rescue team tried returning, they discovered their own oxygen supplies had nearly run out. Of the 3, only 1 had enough air left to return safely. This dire situation exacerbated oxygen depletion inside the cave and turned 13 trapped victims into 15. At this point, it was already the 12th day. Families anxiously awaiting good news once again sank into despair. The deputy commander reluctantly made a public promise that he would bring the children home safely. But such a promise also meant shouldering an immense responsibility. Simultaneously, Rick began considering a bold idea. A seemingly insane plan crossed his mind, but he was hesitant to speak out. It was only when John sensed Rick's anxiety that Rick finally mentioned a certain name, Dr. Harry. Unexpectedly, upon hearing this, John fell silent. Time passed until the 14th day. Because Navy SEAL members found it difficult to manage oxygen consumption, underwater accidents occurred frequently. Consequently, the British Cave Rescue Council decided to send 2 additional divers to replace the exhausted Rick and John. They arrived at chamber number 9 carrying many supplies. To boost morale for those trapped, they even brought handwritten letters from their families. Shortly afterward, the most anticipated person, Dr. Harry, finally arrived. But he did not yet know he would become the key figure in the entire rescue operation. Dr. Harry was an anesthesiologist. The plan Rick had devised was to anesthetize the victims before taking them out of the cave. However, this method not only contradicted medical ethics, but also carried an extremely high risk of death. The dive journey lasted 6 to 7 hours. Continuous injections of anesthetic were required to keep the victims unconscious. Even if they overlooked the anesthetic risk, saliva leaking from the victims' mouths could block their airways and cause suffocation despite the tight-fitting oxygen masks. Furthermore, there were risks of infection from needles or diver error. Any mistake could turn the rescue mission into a tragic catastrophe. Even under ideal circumstances, they could only realistically hope to save 2 or 3 people. Dr. Harry neither wanted nor dared to accept this responsibility, but Rick argued firmly that if they did nothing, the only things they would carry out would be 13 corpses. If unfortunately anyone died during the rescue, at least they would have tried their utmost. Rick's words were logical. Moreover, this was the only viable option available. Still, Dr. Harry hesitated deeply. Only on day 15, when a rescue team member transporting diving equipment became trapped underwater and died tragically due to an oxygen leak, did Dr. Harry finally decide he could not bear witnessing any further innocent loss of life. After carefully considering the risks, the deputy commander also decided to gamble on the anesthetic plan. He even pledged to shoulder full responsibility should severe consequences arise. However, the condition was absolute secrecy regarding anesthesia. Not even the parents could know to prevent unnecessary panic and controversy. Thus, the unprecedented rescue operation officially began. Amid fervent prayers from the gathered crowd, the divers donned their gear and plunged into the water. According to the plan, spare oxygen tanks were strategically placed at chamber number 5 in case of oxygen shortages. Rick instructed everyone clearly. If the first boy successfully made it through the long route, Rick would immediately return to notify the team. Only then would they anesthetize the second child. But if the first rescue failed, everyone was to remain where they were without further action. After finalizing the arrangement, the divers reached the chamber where the children were sheltering. Upon learning their rescue was imminent, the boys erupted into cheers. However, trouble arose even before the mission officially began. Since only 4 could be taken out at a time, the coach selected children in the weakest condition requiring urgent medical attention. But the first boy, named Chai, whose face had become severely swollen, was unable to fit the oxygen mask. He was forced to give up his spot. Fortunately, another boy met all requirements perfectly. The coach gave him medication, and John helped him put on the diving gear. Dr. Harry discreetly moved the boy aside and administered anesthesia. Once completely unconscious, John positioned the oxygen mask securely over the boy's face. He then submerged that child briefly to ensure breathing stability underwater. Confident in the preparations, Rick gently bound the boy's limbs to facilitate safe transport. Thus began the unprecedented underwater rescue operation. Initially, everything proceeded smoothly. The first boy safely completed his arduous journey. But not long after leaving the monitoring checkpoint, he suddenly showed signs of waking up. The accompanying diver immediately reached for an emergency syringe intending to administer more anesthetic. But overwhelmed by exhaustion, his hand trembled, and the needle slipped from his grasp. Fortunately, just as the child began stirring, the diver retrieved the needle from the cave floor in time and successfully administered another dose. At the opposite end, Rick quickly returned to chamber number 9 to inform John that it was safe to proceed with the second child. But because Dr. Harry had forgotten the initial agreement, he prematurely administered anesthesia to the second boy. This forced John to halt midway at chamber number 5 to avoid additional injections. Though the injection had gone smoothly, John noticed the second child experiencing difficulty breathing underwater. His anxiety surged, knowing that if the boy died, he would bear unbearable responsibility and guilt. Thankfully, after careful adjustments, the boy's breathing stabilized again. Meanwhile, after 7.5 grueling hours, the first boy finally reached the cave entrance safely. After 16 terrifying days, he was finally breathing fresh air once again. To protect the family's privacy, the child's identity remained undisclosed. Secretly transferred onto an ambulance, he was swiftly airlifted to a nearby hospital under the watchful eyes of thousands awaiting news. Shortly afterward, the second and third boys were successfully rescued. When the fourth boy arrived safely at the hospital, darkness had already descended outside. It was undeniably a rescue operation unlike any humanity had witnessed before. Truly, it felt like an extraordinary miracle. Helicopters continued circling tirelessly above. Everyone sensed the emergence of hope. Only Rick and John remained unsmiling, because they understood clearly that while 4 lives had been saved, their reputation hinged on rescuing everyone. They were celebrated as heroes for now, but even a single death would lead to immediate condemnation. They would be judged and cursed forever. On day 18, the diverted mountain floodwaters showed no signs of slowing. The immense volume of water caused drainage pipes to overload. Thankfully, experienced elders from nearby villages improvised bamboo pipes, temporarily channeling the water flow. This ingenious solution helped partially alleviate the flooding. The rescue mission persisted. After the Navy SEALs rescued 2 more children, a sudden low rumble echoed from the sky. Dark clouds rapidly gathered. Another fierce storm loomed ominously. Forced to immediately halt rescue operations, everyone endured a restless, sleepless night, especially the rescue team members. For the relentless rain multiplied dangers manyfold. The next day, torrential rain transformed fields into vast lakes. Inside Luang cave, the water levels surged dramatically. Aware of the immense risks, Rick, leading the team, made a courageous decision with the consent of his teammates to continue regardless of personal danger. This time they had no choice but to evacuate all 7 remaining individuals at once. Otherwise, when the storm inevitably flooded the cave entirely, escape routes would vanish forever. Yet even after extensive attempts, no oxygen mask fit Chai's face. Rick assigned 1 diver to remain behind and modify a mask by hand. Meanwhile, the others split into groups, guiding 6 boys safely outside. However, underwater conditions grew increasingly treacherous. Violent currents swirled relentlessly with near zero visibility. Chris, a young diver lacking extensive experience, while guiding a child through turbulent waters, accidentally lost grip of the safety line attached to the cave wall. Immediately swept away by powerful currents, he desperately clutched onto an electrical cable. Following this lifeline, Chris crawled exhausted yet alive into chamber number 4, narrowly escaping tragedy. The child Chris carried showed faint signs of life, but disrupted timing between anesthetic doses forced Chris to remain behind, waiting anxiously for reinforcements. At the other end, Chai's customized mask was finally ready. Enthusiastically, he swallowed medication, dressed in diving gear, received anesthesia, and allowed Rick to guide him through the water. Arriving at the monitoring chamber, Rick encountered Chris anxiously waiting. Unable to transport two individuals simultaneously, Rick reassured Chris, urging calmness until Dr. Harry arrived with backup. Thankfully, soon afterward, everyone remaining trapped had been safely evacuated. Eventually, Chris reunited with Harry. After hearing a full account, Harry thoroughly checked the child's vital signs while gently consoling the distraught Chris. "You've already completed the toughest part of this rescue. Now leave the rest to me. That way, I'll get to be at least half a hero." Hearing Harry's comforting words, Chris finally released his heavy burden. Harry safely delivered the child outside. Under countless hopeful and anxious gazes, the historic rescue operation concluded perfectly. All 13 individuals trapped inside had been miraculously saved. At that very moment, the rescuers lifted their hands skyward, shouting triumphantly. Joy from saving fellow humans and victory over nature surged through them. More than 5,000 volunteers from across the globe had joined forces. Together, they accomplished a seemingly impossible mission. They set aside differences in skin color, nationality, and culture, uniting with a single purpose. Their courage and determination wrote a glorious chapter in the history of human rescue operations. Yet while everyone else basked in this joyous triumph, Dr. Harry quietly sat in a corner alone. He had just received the devastating news that his father had passed away. In choosing to rescue strangers, he had missed the chance to say goodbye one last time. On the 19th day, all rescue equipment was dismantled. Volunteers quietly returned to their everyday lives, once again becoming anonymous. The rescued children gradually regained strength. After some time healing, they would reunite happily with their families. The film 13 Lives, directed by Ron Howard, featuring Colin, Farrell, and Joel Edgerton, was released in 2022. It was based on the real-life event that occurred in Thailand in 2018. Although all 13 victims survived, 2 Navy SEAL members tragically lost their lives. One was Saman Gunan, who drowned during the operation. The other was Beirut Pakbara, who later died due to a blood infection acquired during the rescue. The day following the mission's completion, floodwaters completely submerged Tham Luang cave. It took 8 months to drain the water entirely. According to incomplete statistics, volunteers diverted roughly 56 million gallons of water. Farmers who had suffered losses were compensated fairly by the government. The coach and 3 boys, originally without Thai citizenship, were later granted nationality. People often believe heroes are fearless, but in truth, real heroes do not stand on pedestals for worship. They live quietly among us. They lose sleep over late-night decisions. They tremble when facing danger. It is precisely these authentic vulnerabilities that make their courage so precious. If we define heroes not as those without fear, but as those brave enough to confront their fears, we will realize heroic genes lie deep within every human heart. Perhaps in the next moment of danger, you and I might also become flames of hope. We cannot deny that the survival miracle of these 13 people heavily depended on external rescue efforts, yet their own extraordinary willpower and desire to live played an equally vital role. The unwavering hope burning in their hearts became the hidden strength helping them endure unimaginable adversity. People often forget the incredible power of hope. Hope is not merely the drive for survival. It is also the catalyst capable of transforming despair into miracles. It grants us the courage to face difficulties directly. It illuminates pathways in seemingly impossible dead ends. It reveals the most vibrant colors of life. Today's film ends here. See you again next time.